All right, everybody, welcome back. This is the end of the world. Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and today we are talking about E.T.A. Hoffman's critically acclaimed masterpiece. That's right, it's The Sandman. We've taken it all the way back to 1816, for a little post-Napoleonic, apocalyptic prescience. Yes, that's what we'll go with.
What is E.T.A? Is that a name?
Yeah, it's his initials. It's like Ernst something, Amadeus Hoffman. But Amadeus was not his original initial. He changed it, obviously, in tribute to Mozart. But
with that particular Amadeus,
one has to believe that's why, right? Being born in the 1770s, that has to be the background.
Yeah.
It's a great story, one of my favorites of all time, hilarious, and it ties in nicely with this sort of trend we've been covering, which is AI and the various psychological problems that might entail from a too strict reliance and or relationship to artificial beings.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into all of that, I thought we would talk about Trump's Golden Dome. Which is
this his own name, or is this?
No, that's the military. Of course, it's his name, right? I mean,
the biggest, most beautiful dome.
Absolutely, and it's 100% inspired by the Israel Iron Dome, right? And he says,
I thought for sure you were going to say a movie.
No. It's his
like the way he saw.
Like Alcatraz. Yeah. Oh yeah, it's a big part of Geostorm, which was on was on Mar-a-Lago PBS last weekend. No, he's been talking about this for a little while. And
what is this? What is the Golden Dome?
All right, well, the Iron Dome, as you know, is the missile defense system that surrounds Israel and protects them from Katyusha rockets and whatever other missiles might be sent by the Houthis or whoever.
Yeah.
So he I think what probably happened was Trump saw that and said, well, why don't we have?
How can they have it and we don't?
Yeah, I mean, basically. And,
like the same thing with like Air Force One. I should have the nicest plane.
Yeah. But the funny thing is, it's like, well, when was the last time someone fired a missile into the United States?
Well, that we know of, right?
I mean, basically, that we know of.
The deep state's never going to let you know.
I mean, come on. Someone's going to film that thing on their iPhone.
I don't know. I think the jury's out. I would say 10 days. It's been 10 days.
All right. It's not a prevalent problem, right? Are you kidding me? If that was happening, the defense military industrial complex wouldn't be like, look what's happened. We need $100 trillion more dollars immediately.
So this is what they're going to do with all the money they save from cutting Medicaid is build a dome?
No, they're just giving that directly as tax cuts to the top 1% of earners.
That's better.
This is just deficit spending. This will just be more debt. And it's going to cost up to, well, one of the problems is Israel, quite a small country. The United States is only, I think, 350 times larger than Israel.
Yeah.
And
maybe he could build it so that it only works around states that vote for him.
Oh, I like that.
That could be I could see that as like a Trumpian move for 2028.
Right. So I have an article here from New Scientist in which they say...
Great idea. Right?
Well, what is the Golden Dome? Basically, it would be a series of satellite-based space sensors that would be able to detect any ballistic missile launch or cruise missile launch around the world and immediately be able to initiate a sequence of countermeasures that would take out the missile before it had the chance to detonate on American soil. The problem with this is it relies heavily on technology that does not exist.
Oh, okay.
Like they've never, part of it is like space-based rocketry. So you'd be shooting missiles because, a nuclear weapon goes up into space and then it falls back down. The warhead splits up and it falls back down to its various...
And the Golden Dome thing, it would take it out in space still.
Presumably, with this sort of space-to-space missile. Something
once they figured out.
If that's even possible.
Just a few remaining technicalities.
There's a quote in here where they said the problem with this is that It's the equivalent of hitting a bullet with a bullet in the dark. Because a nuclear payload it's quite small, and like these missiles, once they're sent up, they're not like transmitting back to base. They aren't emitting, right. So you have to literally like physically detect where it is, then fire a countermeasure that accounts for any space junk that might be in the way, or just like anything that could go wrong and will go wrong. And stopping subsonic cruise missiles or short range missiles launched from outside the U.S. border would use established technology. Like that would be like the Iron Dome. We can do that. Sure. The real challenge with the Golden Dome would be its aim to stop large numbers of intercontinental missiles. President Trump has said it will stop 100% of them. And,
so he's been briefed maybe on, he's got some different intelligence than us.
Oh, I mean, I'm sure he just has made this up, right?
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
He apparently doesn't attend any of his intelligence briefings.
Didn't Reagan try to do this?
That's what I was going to say, right? Is that this is just Star Wars Part 2, right?
What was Star Wars? What was that?
It was a proposed laser anti-nuclear defense space grid that would use high-powered lasers in space to shoot Russian nukes before they could reach the United States. That a lot of money was spent sort of testing the possibility of this, and I think that ultimately it was never implemented because it was deemed to be, wait for it, impossible. Right?
Which is interesting because this quote that I see here in the article, in fact, Trump has described the Golden Dome as an effort to complete, quote, the job that President Reagan started 40 years ago.
Yeah. I thought that's about where we are with this.
I like the idea that it's just been a steady continuum, coming up with the idea for Star Wars, and now we're almost at the Golden Dome. Just finish the job that the old man left us,
Right. And the other problem with this, of course, is will this work? Well, probably not. No. But also, if we even start to do this, Russia and China are immediately going to start to do something similar, right? And it just escalates things to, because all right, so say we develop it, right? Now we can shoot down.
Right, you're saying, like, let's say an imaginary situation where technology that is yet to exist does get developed.
Even if it doesn't exist, even if something approaching this exists. Okay. And we put some satellites in space that can shoot missiles. Well, China and Russia are just going to do the same thing. And then, okay, so say we could shoot missiles out of the sky. Say the system worked perfectly. What about missiles sent from space? Right? In other words, this escalates. Like, okay, now
Platinum Dome or something.
Yeah, exactly. Right? I mean, it just escalates. It becomes an arms race, and that'll inevitably cost more and more money. And it could also be the case that they just make more missiles. So say we can shoot down their existing payloads, right. But what if they up that by 100-fold?
Right. So what if they go from launching 0 missiles ever to way too many,
to 11,000.
Yeah, a day.
Well, all at once.
Well, now that the Golden Dome exists, we have no choice but to overwhelm the Golden Dome.
Yeah, I mean, basically, right?
It was one thing to just launch a missile, but now that there's a dome, we have to take care of the dome.
So this feels like
in case we ever eventually want to, launch missiles.
This feels like a potential for a huge escalation in doomsday clock, apocalypse related.
Well, but it's also like perfectly in keeping with a lot of the sort of snake oil con artistry of both him and Musk, right? Like,
yeah,
you saw Musk. We'll probably talk about it in an episode soon, but the Optimus, the humanoid thing, and it's just like he's talking to some guy on whatever one of these CNBC business things, and he's just like, yeah, 10 years or whatever bullshit. Like, he reminds me so much of the monorail guy from The Simpsons.
Yeah, that's a comparison that I think is Lyle Lanley. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Trump's very similar. It's like if he can just go around talking about how they're working on this big beautiful Golden Dome, that's like all he really cares about, right?
Yep. Yeah. It's not great. But speaking of things that you think are not great,
it's just funny that like Doge started out the administration with like, we're gonna go through every credit card that's being used
We're
by
gonna
a
cut $2 trillion.
Yeah, and now they're like, what if we build a dome in the sky that shoots down missiles that don't exist?
Yeah, it's an escalation. Speaking of escalation, I'll try a different transition. What did you think of the rehearsal finale?
Well, it was definitely my favorite episode of the show.
Oh, good, good.
It was the only one that I really was interested in, and I think probably just because it was so. Is it? Can we say what happened? I guess it's
spoilers. I mean, if you want to,
I'm sure you heard about it by now online too.
Skip ahead 5 minutes if you don't want to learn what happens in the finale of the rehearsal. But basically, Nathan Fielder becomes a pilot in order to test out his theory about pilot communication in the cockpit himself while flying an actual 737 filled with
after discovering a loophole that creates the story that makes which the loophole itself stunned me. Like I don't know about you, I just couldn't believe, like it makes sense, I guess, in like a certain.
Well, we learn at the end of the episode why this loophole exists, right?
Why does the loophole exist?
Well, so people who aren't flying actual commercial planes like can move the planes, right?
Okay, right. So let's explain the loophole. So basically,
yeah,
he does really go and put a bunch of hours in. I think it's something like 250, 270 hours or something, flying. And, in typical Nathan form, he's taking it serious. I mean, he's really actually doing the thing.
Yeah.
Which itself is interesting enough to watch. And then he's told that, like, to fly a commercial jet, you need what is like 1,500,
1,500, something like that.
Yeah. It's just way more than he has. But he discovers this loophole where you can actually man an aircraft at the class of a 737, but you can't have paying passengers.
Right.
This is like one of the critical differences. So what does he do? He preys on, from what I can tell, the desperation of actors to be working no matter what. And he sits them down. It's probably, for me, the best scene of the entire show.
The opening audition scene.
He sits them down in the auditions, and they all have single lines, basically.
I'll have a Diet Pepsi.
Yeah. So the first guy's like, I'll have a Diet Pepsi, please. And what he tells them is that it's classic, Nathan stuff where he's like, okay, at first, by the way, during the flight, there is going to be a drink service. This will be when you say your line when the drink service comes out.
And by the way,
it's really going to be in the air. And I'm going to actually be flying the plane. Is that okay? And probably the best revelation I think of the whole series is like, no actor says no to this role.
Right?
Which, like, would you do it?
Sure.
Because I know that I would not go on the plane.
Oh, I would do it.
You would get on a plane.
I mean, think about it. If you die, you're one of the Nathan Fielder victims. I mean,
that's like such a way to go.
Yeah.
Right. Like and I guess, like,
Michael, he has another pilot with him who's a real pilot. And like, if anything goes disastrously wrong, there's fail-safe in place.
And you can see the moments where that is dealt with in the production of the show. But, like, I imagine, for example, there's a moment when he's flying where there's a plane beside them.
Yeah.
Pretty close, because it's actually capturing.
It's filming them.
Filming them. And there's this kind of cutaway where he explains it like this. He's like, so that I could watch the other plane, I transferred the plane over to the pilot.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure was like part of the deal that, like, okay, if there's anything remotely complicated, then we will find out a way in the show to make it look like the pilot has to be the one in charge while they're literally flying beside another aircraft.
Sure. But he does. But Nathan lands the plane. And the co-pilot is like,
what we see.
Co-pilot is like, great landing. I have no reason to believe there's any deception.
It's also amazing to find. I mean, I guess it makes sense, but, like, you don't ever take the plane for real to train. You're
right.
Really,
you know why, right? Because it's so expensive.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. And it's like, as I'm watching it, it's like this. He says it in the show, but, like, it really is like the ultimate rehearsal situation. Like it's the perfect thing for the show, right?
Yeah.
And now he's a pilot in his spare time.
I don't know. For me, I thought the whole show was brilliant. I thought it was great. And, I thought it was really one of the subplots is that Nathan is probably somewhere on the autism spectrum, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not a shocking revelation if you've seen any of his work, but in this episode, he gets tested and he has a brain scan done, but he ultimately decides not to see the results of the brain scan because as far in the well, right, I mean, who knows? Doesn't matter. I'm just talking about the show. The point being that he doesn't need like the diagnosis as a potential like limiting thing for him to be anxious about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I found it to be kind of triumphant, that he has a lot of trouble training to be a pilot. It doesn't come easy to him.
Like he was the slowest learner of anyone they'd ever trained.
Right, and he does like hundreds of hours before they even let him land on his own because he keeps getting these hang-ups. But then eventually, through perseverance, he overcomes that, right? And I think that this is a lesson that people who have difficulty with things like autism or other intellectual or psychological disorders can take heart from. Because it's like, it might be harder for you to do things. It might be difficult for you to overcome these things because of some disadvantages that are out of your control, but through hard work you can overcome them to the point where you're now a pilot. I don't know. I found it to be quite uplifting, strangely uplifting. Not something that I would normally say Nathan's work.
Yes, it was definitely a shift compared to some of the other stuff, right?
Yeah, and I thought it was great. I'm sad that maybe this is the end of it. I don't know. It would be hard for him to do something that. It takes the stakes any higher. But if you haven't watched it and you have skipped ahead, great show, highly recommended by me. Michael thinks it's okay. Shall we move on to the Sandman?
Yeah, let's do the Sandman by E.T.A. Amadeus.
No, it's E.T.A. Hoffman. Interesting guy, Hoffman. You've never read any Hoffman before this, or
no? Of course not.
Well, you never know. He wrote some fairy tales and things that are with Hoffman. We're going back to the era of Romanticism, where we were with Shelley, most famously. And this is a novel that was published, or a short story that was published the year that Frankenstein was written, too. So it's like a direct contemporary with Frankenstein, and has a lot of some thematic overlap as well. So Hoffman is kind of most famous today for writing the novel that became the ballet, The Nutcracker. Did you ever have to go to see The Nutcracker?
I loved The Nutcracker.
Yeah, with the toy soldiers coming to life and stuff. But great vibe. Tchaikovsky based his opera on Hoffman's story. There's a bunch of his other works have been turned into operas, including one inspired by this story. Hoffman is a really interesting guy. He was born into a kind of upper-class German family in Königsberg, which is the hometown of Kant, the famous philosopher. He worked as a lawyer for most of his working life, but was also a prolific polymath, working as a composer, painter, and most famously, of course, as a writer of fiction. And he worked for the Prussian state. This is at a time, a lot of turmoil. He was born in 1776. And when he's about 15, is when the French Revolutionary Wars really kick off, and Prussia stayed out of those for as long as it could, but eventually they just got pulled in, right? So his working life was often disrupted by like Napoleon coming through, and like, oh, we can't get to Warsaw because Napoleon has ravaged,
putting down the quill. He's here again.
Yeah. And he had to flee several times. He spent a lot of his working life living and working in Warsaw, which is, of course, today the capital of Poland, but at the time was part of the Prussian state. And the Sandman is written right after the Napoleonic Wars are finally done and dusted, right? So I think once all the chaos of that was over, he's like, all right, back to work.
All right. Robots.
Yeah. Well, okay. So the story is about robots, or automata, right? Which are the precursors. Did you ever see an automaton?
No, what's an automaton?
An automaton is like a robot that works by clockwork mechanism. So like the same kind of gears you would find in a sophisticated clock, or usually it works on you twist it, you turn a key in its back and then you let it go. But it's not
the idea is that this can like perform tasks or something?
No, I mean in the story, yes, but the automata we see in the story are
dreamt up.
Yeah, they're exaggerated, right? Yeah. But automata were incredibly sophisticated. I mean, you could have automata that would come out, dance around, spin, bow, wave, even some that could make sounds because there'd be like a bellows that was triggered that would be squeezing air through a reed in their throat or what have you. And this is a very German thing and had been, at the time of this story, they'd been around for a couple hundred years of varying sophistication, some of which you can still see. I think of them as being most famously part of kind of clockwork mechanisms. Mm-hmm. So like if you go to Munich, in the town square, every day at a certain time, probably on the hour, these little automata will come out from the city clock tower.
I would hope on the hour, otherwise something's gone horribly wrong.
Right. The belfry or the guy who's
more of a semi-automaton.
The sexton is fired because he forgot to wind the automata or whatever. But they'll come out and they'll do a little skit, and it's really cool. And tourists gather with to watch this happen. I remember when I was just out of college, I went to Munich with a couple of friends. We got unbelievably drunk and went and watched the automata. Sure, we were just like the absolute worst image of American teenage tourists imaginable. Munich, very clean city too. I always feel compelled to say that.
Geneva?
No, but I mean it's a little bigger than Geneva too.
Sure,
But anyway, it is like remarkably clean. If you live in New York City and suddenly you find yourself in Munich, you're like, where are the heaps of trash? Or compared to like Naples, if you go to Naples, you're like, all right, this is legit. This is familiar to me. So automata were real. They were a thing, but the automata that feature in this story are a little bit exaggerated, obviously.
Yeah.
And undergirding the whole story is the idea of an automata that's so real, it bridges the gap between, or at least it passes as a real human being, right? That's kind of like the anxiety that's animating this whole.
In fact, that sort of brings into question the sort of humanity of the people involved as well.
That's right. So the story follows, it's told initially, it's an interesting formal story. It opens with a couple letters, so it's partially epistolary.
Yeah, and I thought you think it's going to be like that the whole way through, and then it just
switches.
Yeah.
And an unnamed anonymous narrator tells the rest of the story.
Takes it from there.
Maybe he just got sick. He was like, these letters, F this letters. This is nonsense.
Right.
So the main character is this guy, Nathaniel, right? And he is a young poet and scientist. He's kind of like Hoffman himself. He's a polymathic guy who has his fingers in several pies. And he's off at college. He's at university, away from home. And an incident happens that sort of brings back these traumatic memories from his childhood. And basically what happens is a big burly guy comes to his door and is selling something. He writes in a letter to his beloved /
The first letter.
What's that?
The first letter.
The first letter.
Where he's like, look, I know you're not going to believe this, and I'm sure you're going to be very worried. I do need to tell somebody what happened here.
And he says, in short, the terrible thing that has happened and the deadly impression of which I strive in vain to eradicate consists in nothing other than a few days ago, namely on the 30th of October at midday, a dealer in barometers entered my room and offered me his wares. I bought nothing and threatened to throw him down the stairs, whereupon he departed of his own accord. So the worst thing that has ever happened has happened to me. A barometer salesman has come by. And we come to learn that this barometer salesman has triggered these memories of a traumatic event from his childhood. where his father, who's now dead, when he was a kid, at night would meet with this gentleman, the advocate Coppelius, who's like a big burly guy, very similar to the barometer salesman. And Nathaniel would be made to go to bed when Coppelius arrived. And the mother seemed to be very down on Coppelius as well. And we come to learn that they're doing alchemical experiments.
Right. But they also, it's important to say, they get the kid to bed by...
Well, I was about to bring that up, right?
Oh, yeah,
Nathaniel comes to associate having to go to bed with the barometer salesman with the German fairy tale of the Sandman, der Sandman, right? And the Sandman is the guy who comes at night and sprinkles, in the more commonly held version, he sprinkles a little sand in your eye and you fall asleep because your eyes get heavy and you wake up and there's little kernels of it still left over and, oh, the Sandman visited you, right? However, we learned that his nurse has told him a much more classically German, vicious version of the Sandman story, where in her telling, the Sandman comes and if a child hasn't gone to sleep, he steals their eyes away and leaves them forever blind. Right. So it has
a little different than helping you fall asleep with a touch of sand.
Yeah. Like, where does the sand come into the burning the eyes out?
Yeah, right. Did he keep the name, or did he become Healing Eyes Man?
And this story is, I looked at the wiki article. This is a very common legend in many different European cultures. There's like a different one in Spanish culture. There's a different one in
designed to like help get kids to go to sleep.
Yeah, it's basically if you go to bed,
scare you and then make it harder to fall asleep.
Well, a lot of these German stories are terrifying, right? It's like, don't talk to strangers because one of them will be the witch that's going to cook you in her oven, or don't go alone to grandma's house because the wolf might be disguised as her or whatever, right? Right. These stories all have a kind of gruesome undertone, and the Brothers Grimm were, in fact, alive and knew Hoffman as well. So this is like the same era as that. So they were alive. So he associates the Sandman with Coppelius. When he knows Coppelius is coming, he's like, the Sandman is coming, gotta go to bed. But one night when he's about 10, he overcomes his fear and he hides himself in the room where they're doing the experiments.
Bit of a Pyrrhic victory.
What do you mean?
Like the success of overcoming his fears.
Yeah, well, it doesn't go well in this case. Right? Well. This is not a Nathan Fielder triumphant story.
Yeah.
He doesn't go on to be a professional hider, a spy or something. This does not lead to... Unfortunately, he's discovered. And it seems that what Nathaniel's father and Coppelius are working on is an automaton of some kind. And he's saying, now all we need is the eyes. And we simply must have eyes. Nathaniel screams, Coppelius hears him, and is like, oh, we have perfectly good set of children's eyes right here. And Nathaniel's like writhing. The father's like, no, Coppelius, don't, like, master, like, spare Nathaniel, let him keep his eyes. And
which all is itself like the feeling of fairy tale fable type thing.
Right, because he actually starts twisting Nathaniel's arms and hands and like rearranging them in a way that makes it seem like Nathaniel himself is also an automaton, right? So it's almost like they're making a new updated version and they're just going to take the old ones from Nathaniel.
Right, and it just kind of gets like thrown in there and then left. So like it's just quickly like he started unscrewing.
Oh, and he threatens to burn out Nathaniel's eyes with a cinder. Yeah. And then at the last second, he lets him go. Nathaniel wakes up the next day, and the first thing he says is the Sandman gone? And the mother's like, don't worry, honey, he's gone forever.
Right.
You won't be seeing him anymore. Now, this whole thing is the eyes, this is Freud. Freud wrote a famous essay on this story called The Uncanny. And for him, it's this like childish fear. Like what the uncanny for Freud represents is the return of beliefs we held strongly as children that we have discarded as being, oh, that's kid stuff, right? There isn't really a Sandman. But then as an adult, you like are going to bed one night and a guy is like sprinkling sand. Like that would be an uncanny event because it would mark the return of something that you had previously surmounted intellectually.
Have you ever had something like that?
No, but I do want to relate this to childish experiences. Like, did you ever have anything equivalent to the Sandman event happen to you when you were a kid? Like,
No, I would say the closest thing to the uncanny is probably um like would probably be karma or God.
oh, okay, how so?
Like in the sense that like I feel like part of growing up was sort of intellectually overcoming the idea of a God, of like an actual
Of an
God,
actual interventionist God.
yeah, or then like people talking about karma and kind of being like, well, I don't know if that actually adds up, right?
Well, I have a couple. All right, I'll respond to that on first. I have a couple experiences I remember quite well. I was walking with a pre-kindergarten class through the woods, and
were you in the class at the time or just hanging out?
I was in the class. I was
okay.
I was one of the kids, and someone in the class stepped on a beehive, and
okay.
bees came out and started stinging everyone.
Mm-hmm.
Not me. And I was like, oh, yes, like I have survived the bees. And as soon as I thought that, a bee just landed on my thumb and stung the hell out of me. And I had the immediate thought that if I hadn't thought about how I was so lucky, the bee wouldn't have stung me, right? That's that kind of thinking you're mentioning. The other event, though, that I remember from even earlier than that, I was probably, I don't know, 5 years old. We were staying in a rented house on Martha's Vineyard for a couple weeks one summer. And I was standing outside of the house and I was watching the cars go by. There weren't very many cars, this is before Martha's Vineyard was, the
overrun.
Must be disgusting. This is more like Jaws era Martha's Vineyard, mid 80s, And I remember seeing this car coming in the distance, and there was a guy and a girl who were like, it was like a truck, and they were riding on the back of it. They were probably in their 20s. My parents were in their 20s. Like, my parents had me when they were very young. Yeah. And as they approached, I was like, oh, like, look at that. Like, that's kind of cool. And then to my horror, they like pulled into my yard. And I was like, oh, they're coming here. And the woman jumped off and was like, little boy, we've come to take you away.
No way.
Yeah. And I was like, ah. And I remember like banging on the door, like being scared. And my parents were home and they came out. And then they were like, I don't know, weed dealers or something coming to drop off weed for my dad or something like that.
Sure.
I don't know what it was. But I just remember that primal moment.
So she was just joking.
She was totally kidding and completely terrified me in a way that I relate to the way Nathaniel is terrified in this story.
Okay, got it.
So you have these moments, but I asked my parents about this. They have no memory of this. They don't know what I'm talking about.
Maybe it never happened.
Well, maybe it didn't, but why would I dream such a thing? Like I remember that. I remember the house we were in. I like remember the
right. I
have a pretty good memory. But anyway, these things have this kind of terrifying like presence in your mind, even years after they've happened. So what happens in the story is that essentially the barometer salesman who's come to his door reminds Nathaniel so much of Coppelius that he starts to lose his mind. Because he's like, oh, another thing we skipped over. Oh, a year after the incident where Nathaniel's hands are twisted and he screams and is terrified, Nathaniel's father dies in another experiment that he undertakes with Coppelius, right? So Coppelius is not only associated with this horrible, traumatic encounter, but also with the literal death of his father, right? And so seeing this guy, the barometer salesman, whom he eventually learns is named Coppola. Right? He's the Italian name of Coppelius, right? He's in college in Italy. He's from Germany, right? So, like he's shaken to his core by this. And even though it's like a perfectly mundane experience, the guy's like, I have barometers for sale, sir, it's brought this all back.
What did you say your name was?
And he's at college. He's studying with the famous physicist, this guy Spallanzani, right? And he becomes kind of unhinged. And he's like, he goes home for Christmas break a couple of weeks later. and his sister slash betrothed. This is very similar to Frankenstein, right? Elizabeth and Victor are raised together and then betrothed. His betrothed woman is named Clara. Clear. She can see clearly. Nathaniel is, a romantic.
Who receives the first letter.
But the first letter is addressed to her brother, but he accidentally sends it to Clara. Right. Which, something weird's going on there too, right? Everything she says about Nathaniel after he returns, everything the whole of life had become for him a dream and a feeling of foreboding. He spoke continually of how each of us, thinking himself free, was in reality the tortured plaything of mysterious powers. We had humbly to submit to the decrees of fate. He went so far as to assert it was folly to think the creations of art and science, the product of our own free will, the inspiration which alone made creation possible, did not proceed from us, but was effectuated by some higher force from outside. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like he's suffering from paranoia. Right? He's like, we're not free. We're all there's just these dark forces that are controlling us. Even when we do art, it's just a devil is manipulating us or an angel is, right? It's like...
Luckily, this type of thinking has vanished.
But I think it's very interesting because what he's describing is the feeling of being a puppet.
Yeah.
Or of being a kind of automaton, right? As though you have no agency. You are as empty as an automaton. And these fears emanate from a sense of like his having lost agency. He gets so deranged that Clara, who's very reasonable, loves him, wants to marry him. Her reasonableness becomes unattractive, and he pushes her away. And he even goes so far, he's like, all right, Clara, I have written a poem about my experiences with the barometer salesman.
How do I explain myself? I've written a poem.
And after he recites the poem, Clara's like, throw that mad, senseless, insane poem into the fire. Like, that's the
like it?
And I was like, wow, this is very relatable. But she also goes on to say, like, his fears of being manipulated by these powers are ridiculous. She says, perhaps there does exist a dark power which fastens onto us and leads us off along a dangerous and ruinous path which we otherwise would not have trodden. But if so, this power must have assumed within us the form of ourself, indeed have become ourself. For otherwise we would not listen to it. Otherwise there'd be no space within us which it could perform its secret work. So... Yeah, but it's also her description is quite weird, right?
Oh, yes, but I think she's trying to accomplish something. She's also speaking to someone who's lost their mind, so it's not that bad of a tactic.
No, I agree. So he calls her, in response to this very reasonable statement, a lifeless, cursed automaton, right? So he's like, I know you're a mindless automaton, the very thing that he fears himself to be. Clara's brother, Lothar, is really upset by this, and they're going to have a duel.
What did you call her?
Yeah.
You call Clara a bitch? Well, no, I called her a lifeless, cursed automaton. Same thing.
And they're about to duel. They have their pistols ready or their fencing swords. And at the last... Rapiers, that's right. At the last second, Clara jumps in between them and is, if you cannot fight, you kill me rather than I will, And so they're, there's a big crying, hugging, group hug situation. Then he goes back to school and finds, to his horror, his dorm has burned down.
Yeah, sort of just when it couldn't get any worse type thing.
But his friend saved his stuff. Thank God. Yep. And they've moved it to a new abode right across the way from his professor, Spallanzani. This is great. It's very convenient. You're right next door. Your neighbor's with the big prof you're studying with.
All your books have been saved.
What could go wrong? Well, he notices in the window Spallanzani's beautiful daughter, Olympia. And he's immediately kind of smitten with her. He's like, oh, there she is. That's the professor's daughter.
She looks perfect.
Wow, she's really pretty. She kind of sits in the same posture most of the day, right by the window. And then gradually, like, Spallanzani will, like, veil the window with a curtain sometime. And Nathaniel's like, oh, why can't I see her? Who should return at this point but the dealer in glass and barometers, Coppola. And this time, instead of just violently throwing him out, Nathaniel works to surmount his fear, right? He works to overcome his anxiety about this guy. And he's selling glass. Nathaniel's like, all right, well, what have you got? At first, Coppola says he's selling eyes, which Nathaniel's like, oh, this is pretty close to the eyes thing with Coppelius. Okay, it's not that.
Don't lose it. Don't lose it.
Oh, it's eyeglasses. Got it. Telescopes. He buys a little mini telescope from Coppelius. All the better to spy on Clara with. That's right? So this is a little bit of a Rear Window scenario developing where he's spying.
Keeping Nathaniel.
Yeah, exactly. He's spying through the window, and once he looks at her through the glass, this is like the turning point in the story. The eyes alone, this is Olympia's eyes, the daughter of the professor. The eyes alone seemed to him strangely fixed and dead. Yet as the image in the glass grew sharper and sharper, it seemed as though beams of moonlight began to rise within them. It was as if they were at that moment acquiring the power of sight, and their glance grew ever warmer and more lively. This is like the pure fairy tale logic, right? Where it's like that Pinocchio is becoming a real boy, or Olympia is becoming a real girl through the agency of Coppelius / Coppola's glass. Because are they the same person? Are they different people? We'll discuss in a moment. Eventually, there's a big ball, a debutante ball for Olympia. All the students come and attend. Olympia comes out. She twirls about. She does a bunch of dancing. She sings a beautiful aria. She plays the piano. She does all these very impressive things. But it leaves a lot of very mechanically perfect, right? Yeah. Not flawless, but in a way that leaves a lot of the other students kind of cold. A lot of students are like, there's a little weird, something weird about this Olympia. They don't come right out and say she's a robot. They're just kind of not into her.
They don't come out and say she's not a robot.
That's true. They do not. Nathaniel doesn't mind any of this. He is in love with her. Now remember, he's already been spying on her for weeks, and he spends the whole night dancing with her. And when they're not dancing, they're sitting at a table, and he's pouring forth his heart to her, and she never says anything except, like that's her response to everything. And she's a perfect, like, this ties in with what we were talking about last week about AI being like a frictionless respondent, right?
Right. And for a certain type of man, a woman who will just listen to you talk about yourself and never have to bother you with anything about themselves can be rather appealing. That is a consistent trope, right?
I think so, unfortunately, for humanity.
Yes.
But yes, so a lot of the students, the smarter students, as Hoffman's narrator tells us, kind of suspect what's going on from the get-go, that she's a very sophisticated automaton. Nathaniel is none the wiser, and he even at the end of the night is so smitten with her, everyone else has left. The bar has closed, right? Last call, they're turning the lights down, and Nathaniel is like, as if in a trance, he's like, damn, everyone's gone. All right, well, I should go too. But he is so bold that he kisses her on the mouth. And even as he does so, noting her extreme physical coldness, he's like, well, I'll just have to warm her up with the passion of my love or whatever, right? Like, all the clues were there, Mr. Policeman. Right?
Yes, well,
from then on,
he was the one who may have been blinded.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
He visits her repeatedly thereafter, and Spallanzani seems very pleased by this. He's like, oh, Nathaniel, you're here to see my empty-headed daughter again.
One idiot's eating this up.
And Nathaniel's friend, Siegmund, the only other character in the story, really, is like, hey, Nathaniel, do me the favor, brother, Siegmund said one day, of telling me how a clever chap like you could possibly have been smitten with that wax-faced wooden doll over there. Talking of Olympia. And he goes on to point out that there's something quite uncanny about Olympia, that she seems to move as though controlled by clockwork. And Nathaniel is just like, again, boiling over with rage at this. But he's like, Sigmund's my friend. I don't want to, just gonna like...
How many times this this man is attempting to work on himself and
I mean,
failing.
he's such a mess, right?
It's so fun.
He's like he's going to explode at the slightest.
Yeah.
Like he's really Coppelius really did a number on young Nathaniel. He says, believing Olympia offers him everything that Clara had lacked, he decides he's going to propose to her. He's going to get married to...
Clara was just like a pretty reasonable woman with some opinions and some advice.
Unacceptable.
Like, no, thank you.
So...
You were better when you existed mostly in my imagination.
Right. Now he has someone who exists entirely in his imagination, even when he's with her. And he gets a ring, he's going to go propose. And what should happen? He goes in and Coppelius is speaking. It's the voice of Coppelius he hears from outside the door, arguing about who's more responsible for the creation of Olympia. Spallanzani's like, I made the clockwork, I built the limbs. And Coppelius is like, she's nothing without the eyes. I made the eyes. And when Nathaniel opens the door, it's Coppola. It's not Coppelius. But at this point, it basically seems like Coppola and Coppelius are, in fact, the same person.
For a man in his state, particularly.
Right. I mean, it doesn't matter if they actually are or not. For him, they effectively are.
That's right.
I mean, and they are. Come on, right?
Yes.
And they're kind of pulling on Olympia, who's a nerd. And her eyes have come out of her head and are sitting on the ground. And Nathaniel looks over at them, and it says, Nathaniel stood numb with horror. He had seen all too clearly that Olympia's deathly white face possessed no eyes. Where the eyes should have been, there were only pits of blackness. She was a lifeless doll. Spallanzani, eventually Coppelius Coppola wins the fight, gets the body, and runs off. Spallanzani's like, Nathaniel, like, go get him. Like Olympia's...
That's your loved one. Go.
Olympia's eyes have been stolen from you, is the way he puts it. And he actually takes the eyes up off the ground and throws them at Nathaniel, which seems to, once again, who could have predicted this, trigger Nathaniel to fall into a spiral of madness, in which he's like, spin, top, spin, fire, ring of fire, ah! And he's strangling Spallanzani. A bunch of students overhear this. They break in. They wrest Nathaniel away and take him off to the madhouse, right? And when next he wakes up, he's back home. He's been suspended for the semester, shall we say?
It's been a bit of a ride for Nathaniel at college. It's hard, adjusting.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people have trouble with college. Nothing to be ashamed of.
Yeah, that's right.
Who of us hasn't fallen in love with an inanimate doll and then tried to murder her creator or / our advisor, right? I mean, that's a pretty standard experience, I think. Interestingly, though, Spallanzani does not get off scot-free. He is also exiled from the university for having played this cruel prank on the whole community of trying to pass off this robot as his daughter. And then one of my favorite parts of the story is this revelation that there's also been political / social consequences in the town itself as a result of this incident. Yeah. But the minds of many esteemed gentlemen were still not set at rest. The episode of the automaton had struck deep roots into their souls, and there stealthily arose, in fact, a detectable mistrust of the human form. To be quite convinced they were not in love with a wooden doll, many enamored young men demanded that their young lady should sing and dance in a less than perfect manner. That while being read to, they should knit, sew, play with their puppy, and so on. But above all, that they should not merely listen, but sometimes speak too. And in such a way that what they said gave evidence of some real thinking and feeling behind it. So all these guys are like, wait a minute, this is exactly how I treat my girlfriend.
Right, and of course, they're like, their detectable mistrust of the human form is just the form of a woman.
Yeah,
right?
Well, of course,
They're
right?
not like going around to their buddies and like, when we're reading our philosophy course together.
Right, like, Henry, you're a real guy, right? You're not a robot. Like, they don't care about that. It's only this idea of being deceived by a woman.
Look, I hate to say this, but I am going to need you to speak occasionally. Is essentially what they're saying.
It's so funny.
Yeah.
Nathaniel recovers. He wakes up. He's surrounded by Lothar, Clara, his mother. Even Sigmund has come to visit him from the university. And, he's better. There's no trace of madness. Nathaniel had grown more gentle and
Claire's willing to stand by his side.
She still wants to marry him. Like, they're going to get married. And better news, the rich, miserly uncle has died and left all the money to Nathaniel's mother. They've bought a big new house in the country. He and Clara can get set up there. Lothar can come move with them. You know, it's perfect.
Yeah. What could go wrong?
Nathaniel had grown more gentle and childlike than he had ever been. More childlike? I mean, he's pretty childlike throughout this. And it was now he first really got to know Clara's glorious, innocent nature. No one alluded to in the remotest way to what had happened in the past. So we are not talking about that. And the whole story culminates with, just as they're getting ready to move, they decide to take one last stroll around the town. They go up to a clock tower. Perfect, to survey the mountains. Off in the distance, Clara's like, look, there's like a brush, some kind of bush coming towards us. Mm-hmm. And what is it that's coming towards them? Part of me associates this with Macbeth, with Birnam Wood come to Dunsinane or something. Sure. Is it also in the distance the figure of Coppelius? It doesn't matter, because Nathaniel brings out the spyglass. He reached mechanically into his side pocket. He found Coppola's telescope and gazed through it. Clara was standing before the glass. So once again, he sees the woman of his desire through the glass, but instead of bringing Olympia to life, the spyglass turns Clara into an automaton. The process is reversed, and all of his anxieties about his own nature are revealed. He once again,
just when I thought I'd put it all behind me,
he spirals into madness. Is
blasted
like
women,
ring of fire, burn, spin, puppet, spin. And he's with terrible force. He sees Clara and tries to throw her off the tower. Lothar, the brother's down below. He rushes up. Clara is hanging on to the railing by one hand. He saves her and then punches Nathaniel. They all go down, and then in the town square below, everyone's like, oh, someone should go and get that madman out of the tower. Who should appear but the advocate Coppelius?
Uh-oh.
He's like, don't worry. He will soon be coming down himself. And Nathaniel, looking down at the crowd, sees Coppelius, screams, lovely eyes, flings himself to his death.
Mm.
And as he's lying with his head cracked upon the pavement, Coppelius just wanders off.
Yeah.
Blends in with the crowd.
I think my job here is done.
Absolutely. And the last scene of the story is Nathaniel, is dead. And Clara, we see a couple years later, happily married, new husband, 2 kids that Nathaniel never could have provided her with. Mm. Which again brings back is the reason he could never have given her kids because he was a robot? And we never really get any clear resolution, nor do we need it. I mean, it's a fairy tale, right? But I think what I really like about this is the way it anticipates some of the problems that we've started to have with artificial intelligence, and that we will have once automata become more sophisticated, like the sort shown in Companion and Blade Runner. And the other
that was that's sort of where I went with the story. It's kind of like anticipating the moments when the promise of this technology ends up unfulfilled. And so whatever the promises are, we talked last week about Zuckerberg's friend program, right? And when the time comes where that doesn't actually give people a grounded, rounded social existence, where does the blame go, and what are the consequences to the self, to society, to the likes of Zuckerberg, right? Because all these promises of whatever it is, efficiency in work, right, is a big one for AI that is just masking the fact that it more likely means that, at least in the short term, less work for everybody, not more efficient work, but just less money.
Just no money. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. And so, the story sort of represents well, I think, the tendency to people who are, let's say, fragile,
vulnerable. Yeah.
To see what they want to see in a technology like Olympia, and then sort of collapse under the weight when it's revealed to not be
empty.
Yeah, not only just to be empty, but for like that emptiness to not be filled by whatever the human using the technology is able to put into it, right? So, you know, you might be a copywriter putting, training AI who then can write like you, and now you're no longer even the trainer for the AI because
right.
the AI
you're fired. Yeah, and I mean, I think automata are also interesting because they're they're not, they like call into question a lot of the things that our society depends on or claims to depend on, like gender, for instance, right?
That's right.
So Olympia presents as female, but is essentially sexless, right? Like,
but
and
not in the eyes of Nathaniel.
not in the
really.
eyes of Nathaniel, but in, like functionally speaking, she can't have children. She can't, right? I mean, she has no interior organs, like internal organs, right? I mean,
I'm sure the new automaton are going to be able to fuck those two. They've probably fixed that in post.
Right, but I think like what the story is getting at is anxiety about our origins also. Like Nathaniel can be understood to be questioning his paternity because when he sees Coppelius and his father fighting over the new automaton, the implicit suggestion is that his mother is not his mother. His mother is Coppelius.
Right.
And his father is his mother, and Coppelius is his father, right? And so there's also kind of like the thought of replaceability. Like if his eyes can be taken by Coppelius and put in a new automaton, just like the example you were just saying, right? It's like if my knowledge can just be taken from me and put into an AI, then I'm like essentially replicable and replaceable completely.
That's right.
And no longer unique either.
And actually you become much closer to the empty thing that you
exactly
putting something into, right?
Right, and I think that's why
there's like a transference of an essence that is troubling.
But it's also, I mean, this is why Freud's so into this story, right? It's also castration, right? Because your agency as progenitor is now removed as well, because you're no longer sex is no longer necessary for reproduction if you can just create. So it's like, well, then what's the point of me? And the eyes are like the removal of the eyes is a classic castration anxiety fear, right? I think the story is just so good. Every time I read it, it's so funny.
It is absolutely hilarious.
Just the way Nathaniel tries to suppress his madness, it's so relatable, but you're also
it's so relatable, like especially like even applying it to like AI and our actual lives, right?
Yeah.
Of like whether it's AI or any of the other social and economic political crises, like daily life becomes this process of like attempting to center yourself, okay, you know what, the next crazy thing I hear about, whoever, I'm not gonna let it get to me. And then you're like, what, he's gonna build a fucking golden dome?
This is right. You're just like serenity now. Serenity now.
But all, it's like, I can't, you ever like sit yourself down, you're like, okay, I can't actually go through my entire life reacting to every sling and arrow. But then a sling and arrow comes. You got a sling. You got an arrow.
The next arrow glints off your shoulder. You're like,
it's still hitting my shoulder. It hit my shoulder. I'm supposed to just be like, oh, it's my shoulder's fucked now. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it's tough. It's tough out there. Oh, that's the Sandman. I love the Sandman. I'd also recommend Freud's article on the Uncanny. I'll put links to public domain versions of both in the show notes. And next week we haven't planned on what we're going to be discussing yet, but
maybe we'll do the Musk robot.
Yeah, maybe we'll do more like a news episode next week. We have a lot going on this week. It's an exciting time in our lives.
Yeah, it is. Got a big weekend coming up.
That's right.
But my bachelor party, for those wondering.
Yes. I wasn't gonna spoil it, but you've now spoiled
As a group of 40-year-old men limp through a weekend in New York City. Can't wait.
God bless. All right. Well, I was supposed to say this at the beginning, but I forgot to once again. And that is, if you like the show, you should tell a friend. You should follow us on the podcatcher of your choice.
Tell all my friends who are coming for the bachelor party.
Well, they all already follow the show.
Well, so. They will by the end of the weekend.
And they better get their relatives and close, and all their friends and all their get their colleagues following the show.
If you're wondering what you can get me for my bachelor party, it'd be a really kind review on any of the podcatchers of your choice.
There we go. You can also, of course, follow us on Instagram at the end of the world WMS. And we will have an exciting topic for you next week. But until then, this has been the end of the world with Michael and Stu.
I'm Michael.
And I'm Stu, and we will talk to you real soon.